Welcome back to our channel where we dive into the darkest corners of the internet and personal experiences to bring you spine-chilling tales. The kind of stories that make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, that make you question that shadow in the corner of your eye, or that strange noise you hear late at night. We explore the unexplained, the unsettling, and the downright terrifying, because sometimes the most horrifying monsters are the ones that lurk just outside our perception, in places we thought were safe. Today, we have 6 terrifying camping and hiking stories that will make you think twice before venturing into the wilderness. The great outdoors, with its serene beauty and promise of adventure, often holds secrets far more sinister than we can imagine. These accounts come from people who sought escape and tranquility, only to find themselves ensnared in situations that defy logical explanation. Situations that left them forever scarred by what they witnessed or what witnessed them. Prepare yourselves, because these aren't just campfire tales designed to elicit a cheap thrill. These are experiences that blur the line between the known and the unknown, the rational and the terrifyingly irrational. So, turn down the lights if you dare, settle in and listen closely as we journey into the heart of fear, where the silence of nature is broken by screams, and the rustling leaves might just be something else entirely. Our first story comes from a group of 4 friends, Mark, Sarah, Liam, and Chloe, who decided to spend a weekend camping deep in the Allegheny National Forest. They were experienced campers, always looking for remote spots far from the usual crowded campgrounds. This particular trip, they'd found a trail that wasn't well marked, leading them several miles into a part of the woods that felt ancient and untouched. The first day was idyllic, filled with laughter and the usual camaraderie that comes with escaping civilization. As night fell on their first evening, a strange quiet descended, heavier than usual. The typical night sounds of the forest crickets, owls, the rustling of small animals, seemed muted, almost as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. It was around the dying embers of their campfire that Liam first mentioned it. "Do you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They all strained their ears. At first nothing. Then a faint sound like hushed voices seemed to drift on the breeze from deeper in the trees. They tried to dismiss it as the wind, or perhaps other campers far off, though they hadn't seen anyone for miles. But the whispering persisted, growing slightly more distinct, though never clear enough to make out actual words. It sounded like multiple voices, murmuring, almost sorrowful. Sleep was uneasy that night, punctuated by the unsettling, almost constant whispers that seemed to encircle their campsite. Mark, ever the pragmatist, suggested they were just tired and their minds were playing tricks on them, but even he looked unnerved. The next morning, driven by a mixture of curiosity and a growing sense of dread, they decided to try and find the source of the sounds. The whispers seemed to be coming from a specific direction, deeper into the dense undergrowth. They packed light, leaving their main camp, and followed the eerie, beckoning murmurs. The woods grew darker here, the trees taller and closer together, blocking out much of the sunlight. An oppressive feeling settled over them, the air growing cold, despite the summer day. After about an hour of pushing through thick brush, they stumbled into a small, overgrown clearing. And there, almost swallowed by the forest, stood an old, dilapidated cabin. It was a shocking discovery. There were no records of any structures in this remote part of the forest. The cabin looked ancient, its wood gray and rotting, the roof caved in on one side, windows like vacant eyes. The whispers were undeniably louder here, seeming to emanate from the very walls of the decaying structure itself. Against their better judgment, fueled by a morbid fascination, they approached. The front door hung precariously on one hinge. Mark pushed it open with a creak that echoed unnaturally loudly in the still air. Inside, the cabin was dark and filled with the smell of damp earth and decay. Dust lay thick on everything. There was a single rickety table and a broken chair, but it was what was on the walls that made their blood run cold. Strange symbols, crudely drawn, and what looked like faded, desperate scratch marks. Suddenly, the whispering intensified, swirling around them, almost as if unseen entities were inches away. Chloe let out a small scream as a cold spot passed right through her. That was their breaking point. Panic set in. They turned and fled, bursting out of the cabin and back into the oppressive woods, the whispers seemingly chasing them, morphing into something that sounded less like sorrow and more like a hungry, malicious yearning. They didn't stop running until they were back at their campsite. They packed up their gear in a frenzy, their earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a primal fear. The hike back to their car was a blur of adrenaline and furtive glances over their shoulders. The whispering seemed to follow them for a while, fainter now, but still present, a chilling reminder of what they had stumbled upon. They never spoke of the exact details of what they felt or heard inside that cabin to anyone else for a long time. Even after they reached the safety of their car and drove miles away, the experience clung to them. They were never the same again. Camping trips became a thing of the past. The woods, once a place of solace, now only brought back the memory of those disembodied voices and the oppressive dread of that forgotten cabin. To this day they can sometimes hear faint whispers on the wind, a chilling echo of the horror they found deep in the Allegheny National Forest. Our next account concerns a solo hiker named Ethan, a seasoned outdoorsman who prided himself on his preparedness and knowledge of the wilderness. In the summer of 2017, Ethan set out for a week-long trek through a remote section of the Sierra Nevada mountains. He was well equipped, had left a detailed itinerary with the park rangers, and was confident in his abilities. For the first few days, his journey was uneventful, filled with the stunning vistas and challenging terrain he craved. On the fourth day, however, Ethan's daily check-in via his satellite phone was missed. Initially, rangers weren't overly concerned, as reception could be spotty. But when a second day passed with no contact, a search was initiated. Search and rescue teams scoured the area along his planned route, finding his last known campsite meticulously packed, as if he had just stepped away for a moment. There were no signs of animal attack, no indications of a struggle, nothing to suggest what might have happened. The search intensified over the following weeks, involving helicopters, ground teams, and canine units. They found a few of his discarded energy bar wrappers further along a less traveled path, suggesting he had deviated from his original route. It was near this new path that searchers discovered something peculiar, a series of strange symbols carved into trees and rocks. These symbols were unlike any known local petroglyphs or trail markers. They were intricate, almost geometric, and seemed to lead deeper into an unmapped, rugged canyon. Despite extensive efforts, no further trace of Ethan was found. The symbols were documented, but no one could decipher their meaning or origin. As months turned into years, Ethan's disappearance became a cold case, another tragic story of someone lost to the vastness of the wilderness. His family and friends mourned, never truly getting closure, haunted by the mystery of his vanishing and the strange symbols left behind. The official explanation leaned towards him getting lost and succumbing to the elements, but the symbols always added an unsettling layer to the narrative. Then, nearly 3 years to the day after he vanished, a disoriented man was found wandering along a highway many miles from where Ethan had disappeared. He was gaunt, his clothes ragged, his beard long and matted. He had no identification and couldn't remember his name or how he got there. It was only through a missing persons database and fingerprint matching that he was identified as Ethan. The news was a shock to everyone, a miracle tinged with profound unease. Ethan was physically weak, but otherwise unharmed. The most disturbing part, however, was his complete and total amnesia regarding the 3 years he had been missing. He had no recollection of his hike, the symbols, or anything that had occurred during that lost time. His last memory was packing his gear for the trip. Doctors and psychologists examined him extensively, but could find no physical cause for his memory loss, nor any explanation for how he had survived for so long or where he had been. He couldn't recognize the photographs of the symbols found near his last known trail. They meant nothing to him. He showed no signs of trauma typically associated with long-term exposure or abduction, just a vast, empty void where 3 years of his life should have been. His reappearance was as inexplicable as his disappearance. He tried to rebuild his life, but the missing time was a constant, unnerving presence, a black hole in his existence. The authorities could glean no new information from him. The mystery of the symbols remained. Where had Ethan been? How did he survive? And what was the significance of those strange carvings that seemed to mark a path into the unknown? These questions lingered, unanswered, casting a long shadow over his miraculous return. He never hiked again, the call of the wild replaced by a deep-seated, unexplainable fear of what lay hidden in the silent places of the earth. To this day, Ethan lives with that blank space in his memory. Sometimes he's said to wake up in a cold sweat with fleeting, nightmarish images that he can't quite grasp, like fragments of a dream he can't recall. The wilderness had taken him, held him for 3 years, and then returned him, fundamentally changed, with no answers, only more terrifying questions about what truly happened out there, alone, amidst those cryptic symbols. This chilling experience was submitted by a couple, David and Lisa, who were avid campers. They often sought out secluded spots to enjoy the peace and quiet of nature. One autumn weekend, they were camping in a remote area of the Ozark National Forest. They had set up their tent in a small clearing, miles from any designated campground or known trails. As darkness enveloped their surroundings, they built a modest campfire, enjoying the crisp air and the starry sky. It was well past midnight when Lisa, who had stepped away from the fire for a moment, noticed something in the distance. Through a break in the trees, on a ridge perhaps a mile or two away, she saw the distinct flicker of another campfire. It was surprising, as they believed themselves to be completely alone. David saw it too. It wasn't just a faint glow, it was clearly a fire, someone else camping out in this remote wilderness. Curiosity piqued, and feeling a little less isolated, they watched it for a while. The distant fire seemed to burn steadily, a small beacon in the vast darkness. They debated whether to try and make contact in the morning, perhaps share a coffee if their paths crossed. There was something comforting about knowing other people were nearby, even if they were strangers. After a while, they decided to turn in, the image of the distant fire still in their minds. The next morning, David woke up early, just as the sun was beginning to rise. His first thought was of the other campers. He looked towards the ridge where they had seen the fire, expecting to see perhaps a wisp of smoke, but there was nothing. The ridge was clear, just trees against the morning sky. He scanned the area carefully with his binoculars. No smoke, no sign of a campsite, nothing at all. It was puzzling. He mentioned it to Lisa when she woke up. She too found it strange. A campfire large enough to be seen from that distance would surely leave some trace, at least smoke in the cool morning air, or a visible clearing. Driven by a growing sense of unease and a need for an explanation, they decided to hike over to the ridge after breakfast. It wasn't an easy trek. The terrain was rough, and there were no paths. It took them a couple of hours to reach the approximate location where they thought they had seen the fire. They searched the entire area meticulously. There was no sign that anyone had camped there recently, or perhaps ever. No flattened grass, no discarded trash, no fire pit, not even a single charred stick. The ground was undisturbed, covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves that looked like they hadn't been walked on in ages. A cold dread began to creep over David and Lisa. It was impossible. They had both clearly seen a campfire, flickering for a good hour or more. It wasn't a trick of the light, or a reflection. It had been a distinct, deliberate light source. Yet here was undeniable proof that no fire had been there. The realization hit them hard. What they had seen was not a real campfire. They stood there in the silent woods, the implications of their discovery sinking in. Had it been some kind of illusion? Or something more supernatural? The thought of a phantom campfire, a ghostly echo of some past event, sent shivers down their spines. The woods suddenly felt different, no longer a place of peaceful solitude, but one filled with unseen things and unsettling mysteries. They didn't linger. They hiked back to their campsite in a much more subdued mood, the beauty of the wilderness now tainted by an inexplicable fear. They packed up their belongings quickly, the desire to leave this particular spot overwhelming them. They didn't speak much on the drive home, each lost in their own thoughts, replaying the image of that distant, impossible fire. They never camped in that part of the Ozarks again, and to this day, they can't explain what they saw. It remains a chilling reminder that sometimes what you see in the darkness is not what it seems. Chapter 4. The Stalker in the Shadows. This terrifying ordeal happened to the Peterson family, Tom, Susan, and their two young children, Emily and Josh, during what was supposed to be a fun-filled family camping trip in the dense forests of Northern California. They had chosen a relatively popular, family-friendly campground, hoping for a safe and enjoyable experience. The first day went as planned, with hiking, fishing, and s'mores around the campfire. Everything felt normal, idyllic even. The unease began subtly on the second night. As they sat around the fire, Tom felt a persistent sensation of being watched. He'd catch fleeting movements out of the corner of his eye, just beyond the firelight, in the deep shadows between the trees. He tried to dismiss it as his imagination, perhaps just animals drawn by the smell of food, but the feeling was too specific, too focused. He didn't want to alarm Susan or the kids, so he kept his concerns to himself, making a mental note to be more vigilant. Later that night, after everyone was asleep in the large family tent, Tom was awakened by a sound. It was a soft scraping noise, like something dragging lightly against the tent fabric. His heart pounded. He lay perfectly still, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the dry leaves just outside their tent. This was no animal. The gait was bipedal, heavy. Tom carefully reached for the heavy-duty flashlight he kept beside his sleeping bag. He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the location of the sounds. They seemed to be circling the tent slowly, methodically. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped him. He thought about waking Susan but hesitated, not wanting to cause panic if it was just some late-night wanderer from another campsite, though that seemed unlikely given the stealthy nature of the movements. Then he saw it. A faint pressure against the side of the tent, as if someone or something was leaning against it. He could make out the vague outline of a large hand pressed against the fabric for a moment before disappearing. That was enough. He quietly woke Susan, whispering for her to be silent. Her eyes widened in terror as he explained what he'd heard and seen. The children were still asleep, oblivious. The footsteps continued their slow patrol. Tom and Susan lay there, frozen in fear, listening to the unseen presence just inches away, separated only by a thin layer of nylon. Who or what was out there? And what did it want? The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, the footsteps receded slightly, moving towards the back of the tent, near where the children were sleeping. A new, more horrifying sound began, a soft, almost inaudible humming right outside. Tom knew they couldn't stay there. Whatever was outside was clearly interested in them, and its behavior was becoming increasingly bold and unsettling. He made a split-second decision. Whispering instructions to Susan, they carefully and silently unzipped the front of the tent. Peeking out, Tom saw nothing in the immediate vicinity. The humming had stopped. Taking a chance, he grabbed the kids, still mostly asleep, and they burst out of the tent, making a run for their car parked a short distance away. As they scrambled towards the vehicle, a loud, guttural snarl erupted from the woods behind them, followed by the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush, seemingly in pursuit. They didn't dare look back. Tom fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, finally unlocking the doors. They piled in and he slammed the car into drive, speeding away from the campsite, leaving their tent and all their belongings behind. They drove straight to the nearest ranger station, shaken and terrified, reporting what had happened. The rangers were skeptical at first, but when they investigated the campsite the next morning, they found large, unidentifiable footprints circling the tent and deep scratch marks on the trees nearby. Whatever had been stalking the Peterson family was no ordinary animal, and certainly no human. The family never went camping again. The memory of those terrifying hours in the dark forever etched into their minds. Chapter 5. The Cursed Trail. Our fifth story involves two adventurous hikers, Alex and Ben, who often sought out challenging and obscure trails. They had heard whispers and local legends about a particular trail in the Appalachian foothills, a path known by locals as the Serpent's Spine. It was said to be cursed, a place where hikers had vanished or returned deeply disturbed, speaking of unnatural occurrences. Most official maps didn't even show it, and park rangers actively discouraged anyone from attempting it. Naturally, for Alex and Ben, this only added to its allure. They saw it as the ultimate challenge, dismissing the warnings as superstitious folklore. They found what they believed to be the trailhead, an overgrown and barely discernible path leading into a particularly dark and foreboding section of the forest. A crudely made sign, weathered and barely legible, read, "Turn back," in faded red paint. They laughed it off and pressed on. The atmosphere on the trail was immediately different. The air was heavy, and an unnatural silence pervaded the woods. Even the birds seemed to avoid this area. As they hiked deeper, the forest grew more gnarled and twisted, the trees taking on grotesque shapes. They started to experience strange things. Compasses spun erratically, their GPS devices lost signal completely, and they both had the unnerving sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Soon, more overt phenomena began. They would hear whispers just out of earshot. Objects would move when they weren't looking. A canteen falling off a rock, a backpack strap unbuckling on its own. The trail itself seemed to shift and change, making it difficult to retrace their steps. Panic began to set in when Ben swore he saw a shadowy figure dart between the trees, too tall and too thin to be human. Alex, though initially skeptical, couldn't deny the oppressive dread that was growing with every step. They realized they were lost. The trail markers they thought they were following had disappeared, or perhaps were never really there. The sun began to set, plunging the cursed woods into an even more terrifying darkness. They decided to make a makeshift camp, hoping to find their way out in the morning, but sleep was impossible. Strange lights flickered in the distance, and the whispers became more insistent, sometimes sounding like pained cries, other times like mocking laughter. It was during a particularly terrifying moment, when the temperature plummeted suddenly, and a foul, sulfurous smell filled the air, that Alex remembered a piece of local lore he'd read about the trail, that the curse was tied to an ancient artifact supposedly hidden somewhere along the path. Desperate, they began to search their immediate surroundings, hoping to find something, anything that might offer a clue or a way out. Ben stumbled upon a small, moss-covered stone altar, half buried in the earth with strange carvings on it. On the altar was a small, intricately carved wooden idol, dark and malevolent-looking. They felt an intense wave of cold emanating from it. Believing this to be the source of the curse and acting on a desperate hunch, Alex recalled another part of the legend, that the curse could be broken if the idol was returned to the heart of the serpent. They had no idea what that meant, but they knew they had to get rid of it. They decided the deepest, darkest part of this section of woods they could find would have to do. Pushing through the terrifying night, guided by a desperate hope, they found a deep, dark crevice between some ancient rocks. With a shared look, they threw the idol into the abyss. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low groan seemed to emanate from the earth, and the oppressive atmosphere suddenly lifted, as if a great weight had been removed. The whispers stopped. The air felt cleaner. Almost immediately, Alex's compass began to work, pointing steadily north. They followed the compass and, to their immense relief, found a recognizable, marked trail within an hour, leading them out of the cursed section of the woods. They emerged as the sun rose, exhausted, grimy, and profoundly shaken. They never spoke in detail about what they endured on the Serpent's Spine, but they vowed never to return to that accursed place. The experience had stripped away their bravado, leaving them with a chilling respect for the unknown and the warnings of those who came before. Chapter 6. The Lost Camper. Our final story tonight comes from a young woman named Maya who, in her early 20s, decided to go on her first solo camping trip. She chose a well-regarded state park, thinking it would be safe and easy to navigate. She was an experienced day hiker, but had never spent a night alone in the wilderness. The first day was exhilarating, a newfound sense of independence and connection with nature. On her second day, Maya decided to explore a lesser-used trail that promised stunning views from a nearby peak. She had a map and compass and felt confident. However, a few hours into her hike, the trail became faint and eventually disappeared altogether. She tried to backtrack but soon realized she was disoriented. The trees all looked the same and panic began to slowly creep in as the afternoon sun started to dip lower in the sky. She knew the basics: don't wander aimlessly. She tried to find a landmark to get her bearings, but the dense forest offered few clues. As dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows, Maya was truly lost and increasingly frightened. She found a relatively sheltered spot beneath a large pine tree and decided to spend the night there, hoping to find her way in the morning light. She had some water and a few snacks, but no tent or proper sleeping gear for an unplanned night out. The night was cold and filled with unfamiliar sounds. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent her heart racing. She huddled against the tree, trying to stay warm, her fear growing with each passing hour. It was sometime in the deepest part of the night, when she was on the verge of despair, that she saw it, a faint flickering light in the distance through the trees. It looked like a lantern. Hope surged through her. Someone else was out here. She called out, her voice hoarse, but there was no reply. The light remained steady, beckoning. Gathering her courage, Maya decided to head towards it. It was her only chance. She stumbled through the dark woods, tripping over roots and rocks, keeping her eyes fixed on that distant, guiding light. It seemed to move slowly, as if someone was carrying it, leading her. She tried calling out again, but still, only silence answered, save for the light that continued to draw her forward. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably an hour or two, the light led her to the edge of a clearing. And there, nestled among the trees, was a small, rustic ranger cabin she hadn't seen on any map. The light she had been following now seemed to be hanging from a hook on the cabin's porch, gently swaying. Relief washed over her. She approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The cabin door creaked open, and an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile emerged. He wore old-fashioned ranger attire. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He simply said, "You look lost and cold, child. Come in." He offered her warmth by a small stove, a cup of hot tea, and a blanket. He didn't ask many questions, and Maya, exhausted and grateful, didn't offer much information beyond the fact that she was lost. He told her the main trail was just a short walk east from the cabin, and that she'd be able to find her way back to the main campground easily in the morning. Maya slept soundly on a small cot he offered, feeling safe for the first time in hours. When she woke in the morning, the old man was gone. A note on the table simply said, "East, be safe." Following his directions, she easily found the main trail and, within an hour, was back at her original campsite, much to the relief of park rangers who were just beginning to organize a search party after she missed her check-in. She told them about the kind old ranger and the cabin. The rangers looked at each other, puzzled. They informed Maya that there was no occupied ranger cabin in that area. There had been an old, long-abandoned outpost, but it had fallen into disrepair decades ago and was certainly not habitable. Curious, and a little unsettled, Maya led them back to the spot where she believed the cabin was. They found the clearing, but there was no cabin. Only a few rotted foundation stones, almost invisible beneath the undergrowth, and an ancient rusted hook on a tree branch. The kind old man, the warm stove, the tea. It was as if they had never existed. Later, one of an older ranger recalled a story. A ranger who had dedicated his life to the park, who had gotten lost and perished in a blizzard in that very area, many, many years ago. His greatest regret, the story went, was not being able to help lost hikers. Maya realized then that the gentle figure who had guided her with his lantern and offered her shelter was not of this world. He was a spirit, still watching over the forest, still helping those who lost their way. And that brings us to the end of our unsettling journey into the wilderness. 6 stories of ordinary camping and hiking trips that took terrifying turns, reminding us that even in places of beauty and tranquility, the unknown can be lurking just out of sight, waiting for the unwary. From spectral whispers to phantom figures, these accounts highlight the primal fears that the deep woods can awaken within us. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories and felt that familiar chill creep up your spine, don't forget to like, comment with your own experiences or thoughts, and subscribe for more terrifying tales from the edge of reality. Your engagement helps us bring more of these dark narratives to light, and we love hearing from our community of fellow thrill seekers and explorers of the unexplained. And remember, the next time you go camping or hiking, when you're miles from civilization and the only sounds are the wind in the trees and the crackle of your campfire, pause for a moment. Listen closely. You might not be alone. The wilderness holds many secrets, and some of them are best left undisturbed. Stay safe out there, and until next time, try not to let the darkness in.